A man stood up from a clay tablet in the basement of the British Museum and began to undress in front of his colleagues. He had just discovered that the story of Noah was not the original. The original was 1,000 years older, a Babylonian flood myth carved on a tablet from the ruins of Nineveh. The man's name was George Smith. The year was 1872, and it was about to become one of more than 280 flood myths we have catalogued, from civilizations that never met, in languages that share no root, across continents that were not yet connected. Each tells, in its own way, the same story. The world drowns. A chosen few survive in a boat. Human history begins again. The question is not whether the flood happened. The question is why every human culture remembered the same one. To answer it, we need to start with the original. The story George Smith decoded is called the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Tablet 11, the king Gilgamesh meets an old immortal man named Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim tells him how he came to live forever. The god Ea warned him that the other gods had decided to destroy mankind. He was instructed to build a boat with 7 decks and a single door. He brought aboard his family, his craftsmen, and the seed of every living thing. The flood came. It lasted 6 days and 7 nights. When it ended, the boat ran aground on Mount Nisir. Utnapishtim released a dove. The dove came back. He released a swallow. The swallow came back. He released a raven, and the raven did not return. He stepped onto dry land and offered sacrifice. The gods, smelling the smoke, regretted their decision. They made him immortal. The version Moses wrote down was 1,300 years younger. In India, the god Vishnu came to Manu in the form of a small fish and warned him of the coming deluge. Manu built a great vessel and tied it to Vishnu's horn. They sailed through the destruction until the waters receded on a mountain in the Himalayas. In Greece, Deucalion was warned by Prometheus, built an ark, and survived a flood sent by Zeus to punish the wickedness of the Bronze Age. In China, the Emperor Yu the Great inherited the work of his father Gun and labored 13 years to drain the flood that had drowned the Yellow River Plain. In the Popol Vuh, the Maya creators destroyed the wooden people with a great resin rain, leaving only those who hid in caves. The Hopi describe a previous world destroyed by the water. The Aboriginal Australians tell of the giant frog Tiddalik, who swallowed all the water until other animals made him laugh. And the world drowned in his laughter. Different gods, different punishments, different mountains, the same shape. So was there a real flood? The honest answer is, there were many. About 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose more than 120 meters in less than 10,000 years. Coastlines moved inland by hundreds of kilometers. The Bering Land Bridge drowned. The Persian Gulf was briefly a green plain. Around 5600 BC, the geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed that the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus and filled the Black Sea basin in a matter of weeks, displacing the early farming villages on its shores. The geologist David Montgomery has documented dozens of regional megafloods in the archaeological record. The civilizations that grew up in river valleys, the Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yellow, each had their own catastrophe to remember. But none of these were a single global event. Every early civilization began at a river. Sumer at the Tigris and Euphrates, Egypt at the Nile, India at the Indus, China at the Yellow, Mesoamerica at the freshwater cenotes. Civilization requires water in a quantity that only floodplains provide, and floodplains punish. Every generation in every river civilization watched at least once the water rise above the banks, drown the harvest, and kill children. A flood was the most reliable form of mass death known to settle humans. It is the one disaster every farming culture witnessed and survived. So when these cultures separately and across thousands of years ask the question every civilization eventually asks, what almost ended us and why did we deserve it? The answer they reached for was already there in the soil. The flood was not invented. It was promoted. From memory of last spring to a story about all of time. But the lens that explains why the structure is so consistent is not geological or anthropological. It is psychological. The flood myth is not really a story about water. It is a story about apocalypse, judgment, the survival of righteousness, and rebirth. The world becomes corrupt. A small remnant is warned. They are tested. They are saved. They are charged with beginning again. The psychologist Erich Neumann argued that this is one of a handful of universal narrative structures, a mythologum, that the human mind reaches for whenever it tries to imagine starting over. The flood myth survived because every civilization at some point has needed a story to tell itself about how to begin again after a collapse. Not how to mourn one, how to begin one. So why does every civilization remember the same flood? Because we do not actually share one ancient flood. We share one ancient response to catastrophe. The story is older than civilization because it is how civilization tells itself to begin again. The Babylonians used it after the river broke its banks. The Greeks used it after the Bronze Age collapsed. The Maya used it after their cities emptied. We are using it now, in every disaster film, in every climate documentary, in every story of a small group preserved while the world burns. The boat is still being built. The dove is still being released. The mountain is still waiting. When the water rises in your lifetime, and it will in some form because every civilization meets its flood, the story you reach for will not be new. It will be the oldest one we have. Every collapse has a flood. Every flood has a survivor. Every survivor has a boat. Whether the water was real, the meaning was, the flood survives because every age eventually learns the same truth. The world can end, and still leave someone behind to remember it. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing.